Sorry about my clock.
All right. Oh, is that a clock chiming?
Yeah, sorry.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. All right. Well, welcome everybody. I would like to introduce our authors for today's event. Carole Bromley lives in York, UK. York. I'm going to say it Americanized. York, UK. She's a poet writing for both adults and children and has four collections: A Guided Tour of the Ice House, The Stonegate Devil, Blast Off, which is for children, and Sheffield and the Peregrine Falcons of York Minster. Carole has won a number of prizes for her poetry, including the Bridgeport Prize and the Hamish Canham Award. She runs poetry surgeries via Zoom for the Poetry Society. Welcome, Carole. And our featured poet today, all the way from Pensacola, Florida, Deborah Bassett is a poet, artist, and musician who spent many years in the Pacific Northwest, up here in my neck of the woods. Still Time, this one right here, is her first collection of poetry. So we are here to celebrate this, and that's a gorgeous cover, by the way.
Thank you.
Please welcome Carole Bromley and Deborah Bassett.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Claire.
Claire. Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. It's lovely to be here, and thank you very much. I'm so pleased, Deborah, that you invited me to help you launch your wonderful book, which
I'm so pleased you agreed.
You'd be quite lonely if I hadn't done. Right, I'm going to explain how we're going to run the evening. We're going to have about 15 minutes of me interviewing Deborah, and then you're going to talk to you for about 10 minutes with half a dozen of my poems from the Stonegate Devil, and then it's over to Deborah, who's going to read for the last 20-25 minutes, and then at the very end we're going to have question and answer. So if you'd like to put any questions you have in the Q&A, Deborah will attempt to answer as many as she can at the end of the session. So Deborah, hi.
Hi.
I obviously know the answers to some of these questions, but could you just tell the audience when and why you started writing poetry?
Oh, wow. When and why? So I started writing really early in life. First, I started reading poetry. I used to go to the library all the time when I was a kid, and I must have checked out a book of poems at some point. I remember memorizing Edgar Allan Poe's Annabel Lee and Robert Burns' My Love is Like a Red, Red Rose, and probably tormenting everyone around me, reciting those constantly. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
And so it really began with reading poetry for me and memorizing it and just kind of finding that special world within the poem. But I started writing in high school in an English class. I'm sure it was an assignment. I'm sure I wrote about, some broken-hearted episode and discovered that the therapeutic value of writing poetry. And I actually wrote quite a bit during that time. It was something that something I did privately to process whatever was happening in life. And then as I got older and moved into, my first degree is in English, so I did write quite a bit during that time. But then I moved into research, and I ended up getting doing a doctorate in a different field and going into a career as a research scientist. But even then, I gravitated towards poets. So there's a type of writing poetry as a narrative medicine in Seattle at the University of Washington. And so I would get involved with that group, and I was always interested in poets and going to hear poets. Of course, in Seattle, there's so many great poets coming through, Sharon Olds and Sherman Alexie. So I went to readings whenever I could. I wrote during that time, and but really it was after the birth of my son in 2013 that I turned again to poetry to process all of the things I was feeling, the conflicting emotions and all of that. And so this book really came together over a period of a couple of years between, I guess, 2018 and 2020, when I was really writing daily. Yeah.
Okay, and so that leads me on to my next question, really. Thank you very much. As there are probably quite a lot of poets in the audience, or would-be poets in the audience, I wonder if you'd just like to talk us through a little bit of what it felt like to put your first collection together. what the process was like.
Yeah. Well, I hadn't planned to put this together until the pandemic. I was writing poems individually. I was sending them to different literary journals, as we do, and hearing back 9 months later, thanks, sorry, better luck next time. Sending it somewhere else, waiting another. The pandemic changed so many things, and I was in the ER, and I was there for a breathing treatment because I was having trouble breathing. And I had this, I was on my phone and I pulled up my files and I saw all these poems, and I immediately sent them to my sister, Naomi, who might be watching, I don't know. Hi, Naomi. And I said, if anything happens to me, please publish these for my little boy. And of course she, was like, oh my God, what is happening? But we had those moments, right? And so after that, and I was fine, thankfully. And I said, I'm going to publish this. It's time. I went to Seattle. I was in Fairhaven. I went and talked with Village Books. Love Village Books. When I lived there for 10 years, that was my absolute favorite bookshop. I almost wore my Village Books t-shirt today, y'all. But anyway, I talked to them, and we, they ended up facilitating publishing this chapbook. So I'm really, really grateful to you guys for that. So yeah, it was pretty exhilarating to see it in print when I first got the first proof, and I flipped through it. I was just like, wow, it's a good feeling.
I'll bet it's a wonderful feeling. Yeah,
that feeling.
Wonderful
too,
feeling.
Yeah.
So, how many of the poems? I mean, how many other poems have you written that you didn't decide to put into this collection?
Oh yeah, wow.
Is it fairly representative of your work, or is there quite a lot of work out there that you deselected for this when you were editing it?
Yeah, sure. There are a ton of poems that didn't make it in. I mean, I have, probably 50 or more other poems. I just, had to realize they weren't quite ready, or they were something I was using to work towards another poem, that sort of thing. And I did try to keep some consistency with these by looking at that time frame where I wrote them between roughly 2018 and 2020. So many of them were written, my dad passed in 2018. So many of the poems were written during his illness and after his death. And then many of them were written during the pandemic, actually, in the early months of the pandemic. So those were the ones I put together for this collection. But I actually have another collection that's already ready. And then I have a bunch of poems that I probably will just, maybe revisit them at some other point. But you know how it goes. You start something and then you put it aside and it's not quite right, but it leads to something else. Yeah.
Did you do that process of putting all the poems on the floor and deciding what went with what and shuffling them about? Did you do that?
Oh, I did. Yeah. I'm kind of old school like that. Even though everything's on the computer, obviously now, I'm glad you asked that question, because that is really something I find makes a huge difference. I always write my poems by hand. Always. Always. They only go into, I only type them when I'm completely finished. So when I finished so I have notebooks and notebooks of poems. Look at this mess behind me, or don't look at it. Lots and lots of notebooks and books. When I decided to write the book, then I did go up to Kinko's and I printed everything out. And then I did spread it out on this table behind me and try to figure out what goes with what. And then I had a couple of fabulous consultations. Shout out to Poetry Society. You know what I'm getting ready to say. And that's how I met you, Carole. And I met another poet doing what's called poetry surgeries. Do I have the association right? The Poetry Society?
That's right.
Okay. Yeah. Fantastic resource, you guys. If anyone's out there wanting some feedback on their poetry, it is a wonderful service that they offer, where you can pick an appointment with a real poet like Carole, and have a phone, send some of your poems, have a phone session. And that really made a huge difference for me in terms of being able to fine tune the work that I felt was already ready, And then, especially in the case with our conversation, Carole, just receiving that kind of validation to, yeah, go ahead, do this. So thank you.
It was a really fun conversation. I'll never forget it.
It was awesome.
Deborah was traveling. She was in a minibus somewhere. And I don't know what time of day it was, but it's quite difficult to find.
It's 4 a.m.
4 a.m.
That surprises no one who knows me.
And we actually had to talk, and she was looking at me on her mobile phone, and the signal wasn't great, was it? I don't think I've ever had quite such a challenging chat, but it was such fun.
I was in the middle of the woods. Yeah. We just talked on and on. Yes.
That was one of the things, don't you, about the pandemic, that everybody got used to Zoom, and that people realized that actually you could do a poetry surgery right across the world. And it was mind blowing to me. I remember coming off the computer and saying, God, I've just been talking to someone in California or wherever you were, and it's 4 o'clock in the morning. With a mobile phone. But it was lovely. And I was really worried that you wouldn't be able to see the comments, wasn't I, on the thing? But, I picked a few quotes from some of your poems in order to ask you questions. So I'll just use those. I loved the phrase in the poem, which is called What I Always Wanted and Didn't Know I Wanted. The phrase was the courage to write what I feel without need for approval. Now, I thought that was wonderful. I think your work is a triumph in that area, I might say. Have you found negative feedback and rejection and discouragement difficult, or has it spurred you on to, or maybe you haven't had negative feedback that the rest of us have? Would you like to just talk about that?
Sure.
Because others might find that they get discouraged. And also what you find constructive.
Yeah, so the negative feedback would be mostly in college, right? Sorry, former professors. I tried not to be that kind of professor myself. But, so often, a critical phrase, which could have been constructive, like basically, what the hell were you doing here? Can be piercing to a young writer. So I think the most discouragement was in those early years. Then I changed direction and became a journalist and then a research scientist. As a research scientist, I've published a lot, and that's what we do. And when you send an article out, your peers review it, and they just tear it to pieces. I mean, they just rip it to shreds, man. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And so you get thick-skinned pretty quickly, and you expect to get those kinds of comments, basically something along the lines of, this total garbage, like, this does not deserve to see the light of day. I don't even know why this person sent this to us. You have to understand, I was also a reviewer. We don't get paid for that. We're tired and grumpy and have our own classes and our own research. But and I'm only exaggerating a tiny bit because everyone knows it's brutal. It's a brutal vetting process. So pretty soon I was like, whatever. You make the changes from the people who actually give you the constructive feedback. You send it back. Eventually, it gets published. That's the name of the game. It did take me 10 years to publish one article, but I stayed at it and I got it published actually in poetic form. I have to add, as research poetry. Yeah.
Fantastic.
Proud of that. Yeah, I'll send it to you after.
Genre invented.
Yeah. I'll send that to you afterwards, Carole. But in terms of like the criticism from literary journals, you don't get much feedback, right? It's kind of like, thanks for submitting. This isn't the right fit for us. Have a nice life. Fuck off and never send us anything. No, it's basically like that, right? But I told you. I was given permission to use profanity. Sorry. But yeah, I think what's harder is sort of like the between the lines feedback or the feedback at conferences and the sort of stuff that I heard that bothered me was things like it's too domestic. Nobody wants to hear about babies. Oh, really? Well, that's kind of what I write about. So,
Right. Well, that takes me neatly onto my next question, which is I've got a quote from A Short Note to My Future Self, which I also love. And it lists what is, hang on, no, as you were, I'll do this one first. In the poem, my son sleeps next to me while I write this poem. You have the wonderful line, but mommy, it's all special. You show great respect for your son's feelings and words of wisdom. Have you thought of writing for him? Have you thought of writing for children?
Well,
it's probably a funny question, but I write for children.
No, I love the question because actually, they're all for him, right? I mean, I dedicated this book to him. All the poems are for him, obviously, when he's a little bit older with some of the content. But he and I recently wrote a book, and I didn't even tell you this, Carole, so it's funny you're asking. We did a series of drawings. He's an artist. I'm an artist as well, and my son's an artist. He's 8 now, but he was 6 at the beginning of the pandemic, and we did a series of prints together. He drew the picture, and then I made a print. And we did it for the letters of the alphabet because he was supposed to be in 1st grade and he was at home and he was learning the alphabet. And we were also trying to deal with the pandemic and all of the stress and grief associated with that. So we actually did an art book together. And then we wrote a poem for each picture together. Yeah, it's a tautogram. Each poem is a tautogram, which means, for those of you who aren't familiar with that, it's a poem where every word starts with the same letter. So for the letter, which worked out well with our alphabet book, for A, every word in that poem started with the letter A. And so that was a lot of fun. We had a fun time together doing that. And it's ready to go, ready to publish. We just have to press the button.
Lovely, lovely. Oh, well, I think that sounds very exciting. And then I will ask you the question. In the poem, A Short Note to My Future Self, it lists what is important to you. The poem begins and ends with, remember the library. We are in a bookshop, sort of in a bookshop. Well, we sort of looks as if we're in a bookshop.
Look at all these books. There are books here. Yeah.
We're in an imaginary bookshop. So we're in a bookshop. What is it about books that makes them so precious to you?
Oh man, they're magic, right? I mean, for me, I was a shy little kid with all these family members around me, but feeling, very withdrawn from all of the interaction that was happening. Books were my solace and my comfort, and a place to go to escape whatever was happening that wasn't pleasant, right? To go into the book and find another world, the adventures, and it's still like that, And so I used to take my son, libraries are very in bookshops, independent bookshops. I went out of my way to make sure this book is not available on Amazon now or ever. Independent bookshops, libraries, very, very important, very special place in my heart. And before the pandemic, my son and I used to go every week to the library. And so when I wrote that poem, it was from a place of grief, knowing that the library was closed, knowing that we would not be going back for a long time. It has been a long time. We still haven't been back. So 2 years. Yeah. I'm glad they're back open. I'm glad for that. We need libraries. Very, very important.
Yes, right. Thank you. And so I was going to finish with just asking you, so what next? What are you working on at the moment? You said you had another book that was ready for the off and looking for an editor and a publisher, or perhaps it's found a publisher, I don't know.
No,
so
not yet. Not yet.
What is that book about, and what you're to be writing at the moment?
Yeah, so while I was waiting for this book to go through the printing process, I wrote a second one. I wrote it at the end of last year. I don't know, I went through this very productive phase where I was writing, it was the Poem a Day Challenge, which is going on right now for April. There's a write a poem a day through a couple of different organizations. There was one in November. I wrote a poem every day for November. And I really liked those poems. So I put that together in a collection, put a few more with it. I'm calling it Fly Me to the Moon. It's ready. I don't know. I have a couple of other things going on right now, but that will be my next book.
Wow. Well done. That's great. Thank you very much for answering the question. So
thank you for great questions.
I'm going to start with, I'm just going to read half a dozen poems from my collection, The Stonegate Devil, chosen rather at random. And The Stonegate Devil, the title poem, the Stonegate Devil in York is a little statue which sits up on a ledge in Stonegate, which is very near York Minster. And he's been sitting there ever since medieval times, when that road was actually called the Road of the Printers. So he's really meant to be a printer's devil, but he's quite a cute little chap, as you can see. So one day I went to Stonegate and I decided to write about all the things that he must have seen while he's been sitting there, all the things that must have passed that ledge that he's sitting on. The Stonegate Devil. He's seen it all: mummers, buskers, guildsmen pulling carts with wobbling tableaus of flood, famine, crucifixion, a couple choosing a ring in Walker and Preston's, a man hurrying another man's wife down the alley to Ye Olde Star Inn, drunks vomiting in the Snickle Way, the purple cyclist on his purple bike going nowhere. The devil's crouched on that ledge since Coffee Yard was Langton Lane and Stonegate the street of the printers. He doesn't need the gear in old guy's rule, wears a black chain and a pair of horns, his skin boiled lobster. Those hands on his knees are man's hands, his feet the feet of a goat, and though you can see his ribs, he has no appetite for the eggs in Betty's display, the chocolate otter, the hare or the candy daffodils, does not thirst for the spirits in the window of evil eye, or the barrels in trembling madness, where the missing student on the poster, Megan, we would love to hear from you, smiles her pretty smile. I'm afraid, like a number of young people, Megan was a student in York, and she stumbled into the river when she was drunk and drowned. It's very sad. But the other sad thing about that poem is that some of those shops have actually gone. So if you're writing a poem about a street, just knock on a few doors and say, "Are you thinking of going out of business? Because I was thinking of writing a poem which has you in it." So the Little Betty's, which was directly opposite the Stonegate Devil, has actually decided to close after the pandemic.
Oh no, the candy?
Very sad. Anyway,
but in a way, it's an artifact, right? I mean, it becomes a historical record. The poem, I mean.
Yes, I guess that's true. Yeah. So my second poem is about one of the many Snickleways or Ginnells alleyways that there are in York, like little back lanes, and they have rather fascinating names. And this one was called Mad Alice Lane, and I thought it was rather fascinating, so I decided to research it a bit. And apparently there was a woman that lived in Mad Alice Lane, and she was hanged on the Knavesmire in York for poisoning her husband. My husband is watching and he doesn't really like this poem very much. I can't imagine why. Anyway, so I feel really sorry for this poor woman, and I sort of suspect, having read about it, I suspect that actually she was she just had mental health problems by the sounds of things. Formerly Mad Alice Lane. The hanged woman haunts Lund's Court, which today is all graffiti and pigeon shit. You can see how it was, the house with a gas lamp, a sun-filled courtyard, lace curtains at an upper window, a handy shortcut to Swinegate and the old mission hall, Oscars, El Piano, Nail Bar 1, that you wouldn't nip through here after dark alone. Executed for poisoning her husband, or possibly just for having the gall to go round the bend, she wanders the Ginnel, muttering recipes. Dead toad and chamomile, the juice of cuckoo pint chased down with honey, a raw bad egg, a brace of pheasant, the shot still in, a steamed sponge pudding laced with lead, a grass of grog with something green, the daintiest petit fours you've ever seen, their soft centres filled with pure strychnine, washed down with ale, tinged with dropwort, bryony and aconite. Alice doesn't eat a bite, just watches him tuck in, then runs like hell up Petergate.
I'm really struck by the dead toad and chamomile.
Yeah, the recipes. Because we're sort of in a bookshop, I thought I would read you a literary poem. I like writing about literary figures, so this one is called John Keats' Ring. I'm sure you all know that John Keats was secretly engaged to the woman who had been his next door neighbour in Hampstead, Fanny Brawn, and he gave her a ring, which is on display in Keats' house, the museum next to the library in Hampstead. And she kept it hidden. She wore it on a string because her parents wouldn't have approved. And apparently she wore it on her hand for the rest of her life after he died, even though she married and had children. Obviously, she never stopped loving John Keats. John Keats' ring. Fanny wore it on a string those last months. Oh, she wore it against her untouched skin. She had his heart, he swore it. Her mother would have disapproved. He'd bear enough to live. She took this token of his love, all he had to give, and kept it hidden in her gown, warm against her breast, the solitaire of almondine, until he was at rest. They cut her hair when she fell sick. She'd neither sleep nor eat, but dressed herself in widow's black, and all night walked the heath.
Was it because he was a starving poet that she
Sorry?
wasn't allowed? Was it because he was a starving poet that she wasn't allowed to marry him?
Yeah. Well, and he was ill, and he was, he had to go abroad. Yeah, they wouldn't have approved. So this one is also about books. It's about, we were talking earlier, weren't we, about antiquarian bookshops and independent bookshops and antiquarian bookshops, for which York at one time was quite famous. Sadly, have gone one by one.
Amazon.
Really a shame. Anyway, this one was about a little tiny antiquarian bookshop, which was called Passageway Books, down a passageway in York. Passageway Books. Why does the door always creak? Will he ever go through those boxes of magazines? Taxidermy for beginners, £3.50. A 10-volume encyclopedia with Mal to Aura missing offers. Atlases of vanished worlds. Dictionaries that have never heard of smartphones, iPads, even teletext. Crime novels someone took on holiday and never opened. 6 pristine copies of birthday letters in hardback. And then the pocket Milton I bought for you. I handed it over in a cotton bottle, didn't write in it because it was so beautiful. Still £25, as if I'd never gone there, as if you and I had never been.
Magical.
This one. Yes, if you come to York, you will find that there is a shrine to Margaret Clitheroe, who was canonised by the Pope in the 90s when he came to visit York. But Margaret Clitheroe was martyred, crushed between a stone and a door. And her hand, would you believe, is on display in the Bar Convent Museum, which was...
I would believe it because I've been to Italy.
Which was part of the school where I used to teach. And the children, I'm afraid, used to joke about it because they were kind of used to relics and I wasn't. Margaret Clitheroe's hand. The hand is too much for me. To my pupils used to such relics, it's a joke. When the Pope came and canonised her, they say he received one of her fingers as a memento. The lads in the back row reckon he's collecting body parts and all he needs is a torso. The story, of course, is what counts. That martyrdom under a weighted door for the crime of harbouring priests. I never walked down the shambles without thinking of her, how she sent her shoes to her daughters so they could follow in her footsteps and went to her death barefoot. And I'm going to finish with this poem because Deborah said when she read it, it made her cry. So I thought I'd try and make her cry again.
Oh no, you know it won't take much.
She said she howled, so perhaps you should mute me while I read this poem.
No, it's be a challenge.
I wrote it after my best friend died, and it's called When I Heard Your Chemo Hadn't Worked. I had the urge to pick black currants. Why it had to be black currants and not blueberries, raspberries or strawberries, I don't know. We never eat black currants, I guess because they must be cooked with added sugar, and if you boil a pan dry, they stick like crazy, and even if the compote works, it stains, and the stains never come out however many times you put the clothes through the hot wash. It rained on me so hard I had to park my bike under a tree and try to shelter, though the rain meant business and hit my back over and over, like my mother that time I flicked water down the stairs at my brother, and I didn't know she'd spend all day painting the landing and hall. When I got there, the notice said far field, and I walked miles and there were only blackberries, and I'd set my heart on black currants. Then I spotted the bushes and there was no one else. And even though it started to rain again and my shoes were getting stained purple, I didn't care, just crouched down and milked the fat black drops into the bowl. And on that cheery note, I'm going to stop my reading and hand over to Deborah, who's going to read to us from Still Time.
First, I'm going to talk about the Stonegate Devil because I read this cover to cover. Wherever I go in the world, I go into an old bookshop, at least one, and I buy at least one book of poetry. But after I met Carole, I ordered this, and I save the poems to sort of savor, like read one here and there, But before we did this, I wanted to have read them all. So I read it cover to cover. Sorry, my clock, there it goes again. Let's pause for my clock to finish ringing. I read it cover to cover, and knowing that these poems at the end were about your good friend Roz, by the time I got to when I heard your chemo hadn't worked, I was like, God, no. And you captured it. That feeling when you know you're losing a loved one. And there's something little and ordinary like black currants, not blueberries, that becomes so important. You just nailed it with this. And so I was I was howling, crying. And then I finished the rest. And then I think I called you and said, cry my eyes out. So if you want to cry your eyes out or just read some amazing poetry, this is the book to buy, not mine, if you're trying to decide between the two. Love it. All right. Thank you, Carole, for indulging me. All right, I will read a little bit from mine. How's my time? Oh, we're not out of time. Okay. I will read a few. I will read from some of the ones that you mentioned, Carole, when you were asking me questions. And I think the first one was, my son sleeps next to me. No, maybe it was. Hold on. Did I forget about this? What I always wanted. So I'll start with that one. And I actually, I read a lot of poetry and I'm inspired by a lot of poets. So when I read a poem I really like, sometimes I try to write something similar. And this one was inspired by Julia Alvarez, who wrote a poem called What Was It That I Wanted? And I thought, oh, I like that. That's an interesting concept. So I titled mine What I Always Wanted and Didn't Know I Wanted. Similar, but not the same. A home to call my own, where I could sink into weathered ropes of a wide hammock, swing side to side, watch the clouds dance, hear the tinkling songs of many chimes that grace the eaves of this old house, the sturdy limbs branching out from trees, both aged and new. A refuge for tiny swallows, chatty crows, brilliantly feathered cardinals, and my favorite, gentle mourning doves. Their coos lull me to dreaming of seeds to plant. I suppose I wanted to be heard and understood, rewarded for my words, sentences put together to tell the stories in my mind, the ones I heard and lived and dreamed. To be valued for my brains and my beauty by parents and teachers and friends, by bosses and lovers and peers. To be successful, whatever that meant. I really didn't know. I never wanted to be the hero in my tale. What was it I didn't know I wanted? The courage to write what I feel without need for approval. The warmth of a dog by my side. The wordless understanding in his brown eyes. I didn't know how much I longed for that. I didn't know I wanted dirty little feet in my lap. I didn't know I wanted to stroke my dad's swollen hand as he was dying, to hold his gaze in love and strength until his eyes rolled away. So that's that. And I had every intention of inviting Julia Alvarez to this reading, and I just realized I forgot. Sorry, Julia, I'll send you the link and hope you would make time to watch. So the other poem that you mentioned was My Son Sleeps Next to Me While I Write This Poem. That was a fun little poem, and I actually, I was writing as he was sleeping next to me, digging his feet into my back, as he likes to do. My son sleeps next to me while I write this poem. Louis is sleeping, curled under the covers, a little snail without his shell of whining and fussing and wheedling for something more. Another cookie, although he only picked at his dinner. Another program, although his limit is one. Another toy, although the house is filled with toys of all shapes and sizes, action figures from movies he has not yet seen. And 1970s television series he likely never will. Yard sale finds that I bag up and carry away when it all gets to be too much. I don't get rid of anything special, I tell him when he asks why some of his toys are gone. He smiles, embarrassed for me, looking suddenly so much older than his 4 years. Mommy, he says patiently, it's all special. He turns in the covers now, like the hands of a clock, until growing limbs and kicking feet rest in the soft space between my ribs and hips. I caress those rough little feet, feel the pebble hardness of each toe, the smooth dip of his arch. And of course, he has now seen those 1970s television series. And because he's a precocious child with a photographic memory at the age of 8, he remembers every single toy he ever had that I got rid of. That's, that's what I live with. A short note to my future self. Okay, so when the pandemic hit, like so many of us, I ran out and bought toilet paper. No, I did not run out and buy toilet paper, crazy people, okay? Still can't, okay. What I did was I sat down and started writing poems like a maniac, because that's what I do. Like, hey, I lived in the Middle East. We don't need toilet paper. Sorry, but we don't. All right, a short note to my future self. I want you to remember the way we used to hug people without thinking. My mother, a dear friend at the street market, the hip stylist who fixed my DIY hair disaster. We used to hug strangers even. Remember this. I want you to remember the downtown public library, the smiles of recognition from familiar faces behind the checkout counter, stopping to chat with Miss Lois about kids programming, treating ourselves to a lavender latte and a chocolate chip cookie after pouring through the children's books and movies. Please remember the library. And I wrote that one probably within a week of knowing that, let's see, it must have been March of 2020. I sent it to a few friends who weren't receptive because it was too soon to be talking in this way. But I knew immediately because I had studied pandemics when I was a research scientist. And I knew immediately that it was going to be a long time. And so I began grieving more than most, more quickly than most people because of that. But that was a poem I wrote to work through what I knew was coming with the hugging and the library and all the things that I suddenly knew were gone. But thankfully are back. So yeah, that's that. The truth right there. How's our time? Good?
Yeah.
Okay. Oh geez, this is a hard one. Why did I list this one for myself? But I'm going to read it. And what I want to say before I read it is that I'm sensitive to the fact that there are some images and stories that are triggering to people. And so I do reference a suicide attempt and some death and childbirth. So yeah, that's your trigger warning. The truth right there. After they counted his fingers and toes and gave me his APGAR score, never had a patient ask for that before. We looked at each other and whispered triumphant and exhausted relief. We did it. We'd already seen the worst, we thought. A decade of infertility, 1 pregnancy loss, my parents' divorce after 37 years, our artist friend standing in front of a moving train for his 50th, my mother-in-law's terminal diagnosis of stage 4 lung cancer and knowing we wouldn't make it back in time to say goodbye. This baby was a surprise of the best kind, a gift, a blessing after so much pain. For 9 months, I was almost afraid to move for fear of doing something wrong that would take him away from us. Didn't eat sheep's or goat's cheese or sushi or deli meat. Slept on my left side only, not the right, not the back, not the stomach. Canceled all my conference travel, flossed every night, checked his heartbeat every day, holding a stethoscope to my belly. In the end, I had a C-section where I found I was allergic to morphine and most other categories of painkillers, but he was here. We did it. This was before the infant acid reflux, the vomiting after every feeding, the sleepless days and nights when he'd only fall fitfully asleep for a few minutes if we held him against our bodies and paced the cement floor of our New Orleans studio apartment. And there would be more. The postpartum depression that would take me to the edge of a 10-story building, my dad's cancer that would eat away his forehead and neck and eventually his skull, my grandmother collapsing from an embolism the day we pull into town to be closer to family. I think maybe life's like the leaves I rake again and again under the ancient oak that graces my front lawn. The city workers replacing the gas line apologized for scattering the curbside pile, waiting for a Thursday afternoon pickup. It's okay, I say, grabbing my rake. There'll be more tomorrow anyway, and isn't life just like that? A young man breaks into a wide smile, nods his head. Yes, it is. That's the truth right there. That's the truth right there. And I remember we talked a little bit about this one, Carole, and you had asked me, thank you. You had asked me about those sorts of phrases that I hear and work into my poetry, and I do write about myself. I do write about the interactions I've had with people, and how do I remember those things? And I think, from my years as a journalist and then later as an ethnographer, I just learned to remember exact phrases and exact wording. I kind of honed that skill. But a very handy device for remembering anything is this thing, right? I use the record function on this all the time, especially now when my memory isn't what it used to be able to remember little phrases or something like that. So yeah, how much time do I have? A little bit, a few more?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's do this one. This is one of my favorite poems, and actually a lot of people who have read it really enjoy it. So I wrote this after watching some nature documentaries with my son, who has always enjoyed documentaries. He's kind of moved on to the whole Marvel comic thing now, which is less interesting to me. But when he was 4 years old, he loved nature documentaries, and we watched a lot of them together. So this was one inspired by that. It's called My Child Asks Why the Polar Bears Are Dying. My 4-year-old watches nature documentaries. He asks why the polar bears are dying, why he won't be able to see them one day when he's old like me. He wants to know why the polar bears are starving. How do you explain habitat loss to a child? One day when he's old like me, we will remember the polar bears. I try to explain climate change to my child. I tell him people like to drive and to fly. Will we remember the polar bears? We like to buy cheap things and eat cheap food. We like to drive and to fly. We don't want to think about the polar bears. We like to buy cheap things and eat cheap food. And what can we do about the polar bears anyway? We don't want to think about polar bears dying. But where is everyone going? He asks. What are they buying? And what can we do about the polar bears anyway? What could possibly be more important than saving the polar bears? He wants to know where everyone is going, what they are buying. He's crying now. He doesn't understand. What could possibly be more important than saving the polar bears? He wants to know why we are letting them drown. He's crying now. He can't understand why he won't be able to see the polar bears, why we are letting them disappear. My little boy watches nature documentaries. So probably best that he moved on to Spider-Man and and those horrible action films. No, those lovely action films. Disney and all that good stuff. How are we doing, Carole?
We've got another 5 minutes.
Okay.
Another couple of poems.
I'll keep tormenting people.
Incidentally, I really loved My Child Asks Why the Polar Bears Are Dying. I didn't have time, but I was going to ask you a question. I might ask it later on.
Yeah, you can ask it now.
No, after your reading.
Okay.
One I really loved was In the Hours Beforehand.
Oh, okay.
Maybe that's too difficult to read, but it's very moving.
Okay, I'll read that one. Just have to figure out where it is.
It's on page 34.
Thank you, Carole. Can't find my own poems. Okay, in the hours beforehand. And, this one was actually written while I was living in Seattle, and I was finishing my PhD. I think I was either getting ready to start a postdoc in psychiatry, or I was already in it. And I included it because I really like it. So it is one that was written in an earlier time than most of the rest of these. In the hours beforehand, I would take my dog for a romp through crunchy autumn leaves in the park, laughing as he belly flopped in pursuit of his green webbed ball. There goes my clock again. His breath ragged, his eyes bright. I'd noticed the astonishing azure sky, the brilliant colors of the leaves, deep yellow, shocking orange, brash red, and evergreen. I'd listen to the song of the man selling newspapers outside Whole Foods on the corner of Westlake and 9th, and watch a baby girl wobble up to him, her hand in her mouth, her eyes wide. Maybe I'd stop to answer the questions of a woman waiting for the streetcar, wish her luck in deciding between a Jack Russell, French or English bulldog, as she puts her earbuds in, turned towards the streetcar. I'd pass a new fragrance shop, its proprietor a young woman with a dark, sleek ponytail and tall leather boots, her face flushed, blowing kisses to her mother and friends, thanking them in Greek. I'd watch the women cross the street, high heels carefully avoiding potholes, jeweled hands waving behind them, coiffed heads bobbing close to one another. Moving down the sidewalk, I'd be passed by a young man in tight dark denim, pushing tortoiseshell glasses up the bridge of his nose, finishing his takeout lunch. I want to tell him to sit down, to savor his food, to breathe in the crisp November air. I'd prepare my own lunch of leftover borscht, made with fresh beets, bread filled with hazelnuts and currants. I would eat it, my dog waiting at my feet. Here, I would dream about bringing a child into our family and hope that there was still time. I would pray, please give us more time. So that's when an asteroid was headed for Earth. Not expected to hit, but you never know, right? So all sorts of things can inspire poetry, right?
Yeah. Why don't you finish with the very first poem, That Summer?
Okay, yeah.
The other one I like very much. Page 3.
This was one, I'm trying to remember when I wrote this. I think it was one of the last ones I wrote for this collection, and just sort of remembering some special moments during childhood and the teen years. All right, this one's called That Summer. Once the bedroom door stood firmly closed, we pulled on terry shorts and summer tops, pushed the screen from our window, climbed out and walked in darkness to the end of the street, where we hopped into a Corvette, engine a low rumble, lights off. Our liberator, a shy 19-year-old, thrilled to call 4 laughing, pretty sisters his companions. I can't even remember where we went on those warm summer nights outside of time, when the air itself was a heady mix of fear and newfound freedom. Only once did we return to windows filled with light, our mother on the sofa, unsmiling, eerie, calm. She questioned us, watched us, recognizing a new and formidable opponent. Next time, use the door.
I love that.
Thanks, Carole.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Deborah. Those were really beautifully read, so movingly read, and you did it absolutely beautifully. Thank you. And we do have a few questions. The first one is from Catherine Nelson Bourne.
Hey, Catherine.
Catherine would like to know how poetry informs your music and vice versa. Do tell us a little bit about your music.
Oh, wow. That's a good question.
The links between the two.
Yeah, so I do write music, electronic dance music. I write lyrics, I write music, I play it, I produce it. Funnily enough, the two are completely separate right now. So when I write song lyrics, those don't feel like a poem to me. And I actually just wrote a song that I sold for the first time ever and immediately regretted it. because, my song. And I was thinking about that, like what about this feels different from and I just can't explain other than it's completely different. So right now I would say the two don't inform each other. They feel very separate. And if I'm in songwriting mode, I'm not in poetry writing mode.
Right.
Yeah. And I'm not
and
sure.
Yet your musicality must inform your poetry writing. It must do.
It must. I mean, how can it not, right? But right now it feels like two separate worlds for me. So yeah, but it's a great question.
It is a great question, and I think you should just tell us about, because I think we were talking about it before we let everyone in. Tell us about your radio program, which goes out in the UK.
Yeah,
and I'm very excited about it.
Yes. So I met these fabulous people a couple of months ago at First Choice Radio, which is a radio station in the UK, and Rachel Cruz. I know you're not there, girl, because you're doing your live stream right now. Played some of my songs, and then we got to know each other, and I was a guest on her Sunday show, Rach on Sundays, which is fantastic, and I get up at 4 a.m. to watch it now because it's that good. You don't have to get up that early. You guys in the UK can watch it at 10 a.m. And yeah, one thing led to another, and I have a show on Thursdays at 9 p.m. UK time called The Secret Place. And I just had my second show yesterday for Trans Day of Visibility. And yeah, I love it. It's shout out to my people at First Choice Radio. It's been a lot of fun.
But Deborah was very amused to find that she was told that she mustn't swear at all on air. She couldn't quite believe it because she thinks people from the UK do swear quite a lot, and it's kind of completely unrealistic.
But you guys do. Y'all swear constantly, way more than Americans do. From our perspective,
it's true.
Right?
It is true.
Thank you. Yeah. And so that was a little.
I was quite shocked at finding the F word in one of my poems, in fact. But anyway, on the radio, you don't swear.
Yeah, it was thrilling. It was thrilling to find an F-bomb in your. I was hoping you'd read that one. I might have to read it. It was so good.
Another question from Catherine. About My Child Asks Why the Polar Bears Are Dying, which is one of my favourites too. About the repetition, was there a specific form applied? I found the varied repetition fascinating as well as very effective. Yeah,
there was a specific form. Anytime, so I do enjoy writing free verse. That's my thing. At least I thought it was, until I started talking to other poets like Carole and some other folks in the Poetry Society, and they encouraged me to embrace form, which apparently all these years I thought I hated, but I actually love. Every time I write to a form, I find it just really hones my images in a way that writing free verse doesn't. And so that one is a form. I can't remember which form. But it is a form. It's one of the ones that repeat. So the first 4 lines just repeat in different ways throughout the poem. Do you know off the top of your head, Carole? I can't find the poem. If you tell me. Okay, it's a page 6. Yeah, page 6. And so it's 4 lines that you then repeat in different ways throughout the rest of the poem. But you can change them up a little bit. It's probably a pantoum, then, is it? It's a pantoum. Thank you. I knew you would know. And I very much like the one which I never know how to pronounce it, which is alphabetical. Oh yeah, I don't know how to pronounce it either. Abecedarian, an Abecedarian for now. I mean, that's what I say, an Abecedarian. Very clever, very simple. Every line starts with a different letter of the alphabet, and it must be a really complicated thing to do, but it works beautifully. It was so fun to write, I'll be honest. It was so fun. And the book I'm working on, the book I just finished now that I mentioned, each poem is a different form. And so it turns out I do love form. I thought I hated it. You could find something out about yourself. So I think that's the end of the questions in the... That's all y'all got for me? The Q&A, unless someone else has a question. I'll answer anything. Go for it. The questions are in the chat. Okay. No, they're just thanks for things and comments about beauty and that sort of thing. So anyway, thank you very much, Deborah. And I'm going to hand over to Claire. Thank you, Carole. Thank you so much.
Well, this has just been a a delight to eavesdrop on. I was invisibly listening and watching, and what a great first poetry event for Poetry Month. I always love April. April's just it's just all poetry all the time. It's gorgeous. And I loved both of your poetry. The two of you is very different, and I felt like they complemented each other very well today. So I appreciate your sharing with us. And basically in the chat, it's just a lot of love. People saying thank you and how much they're enjoying this. And I am putting the link in the chat, of course, to our website where both books can be purchased. I will say that we are not doing international shipments, but wherever you are, find your favorite independent bookstore and order these books, and they should be able to get them for you somehow. But
bookshops are very clever that way.
Yes, we are. We're wily.
You can get any book you need from an independent bookshop. You have no need to ever order another book from Amazon.
You said it here. Okay, yes. Thank you, Deborah. All right. Well, thank you so much to the audience. Thank you so much to our poets today. Ladies, do you have any parting words for everybody?
Thank you.
Do you want to go first, Carole? I just want to say thank you to everybody for coming, for listening. I really appreciate it. Y'all know it means a lot to me. Thank you. And thank you to Carole and to Claire and to Village Books. You guys rock. Thank you. And Carole, I was blown away when I got your message saying you would do this. I literally screamed.
I was blown away when I got your message asking me to. And thank you very much, Claire. And I hope one day that I will come to, it isn't Seattle. Where is it? It's 90 miles north of Seattle.
Yes,
Bellingham.
We're in Bellingham.
But you'll probably fly into Seattle.
Yes. And then drive up to Bellingham, and we will welcome you.
We will fly up to Bellingham. Yeah. Okay.
Great.
Thank you very
All right.
much. Thank you. And thank you, Deborah.
Thank you.
And thank you very much
so much
for coming.
Thanks.
All right. Go forth and have a lovely day. Stay well. Bye-bye.
Happy April Fools.